Welcome to the Craft of Coaching podcast, where we dive into what it truly takes to become a skilled, confident life coach. I'm your host, Kate, head of the CLCC or Credentialed Life Coach Collective, an ICF accredited Level 1 coach training program. We combine courage, coaching, and community to offer you more than just a training program, but a life-changing experience where you use your own personal transformation as the learning ground for supporting your clients. On this podcast, we explore how you can use coaching skills to support your clients or expand your own growth, all grounded in evidence-based coaching practices. Learn more about our program and get free resources for becoming a life coach at teamclcc.com. And now, here's today's episode. Hi, everybody. I've been doing a number of episodes on this uncertain economy and the things that are adjacent to it. And today I'm going to talk about something adjacent, which is what do you do? How do you support your clients who have lost their job? How do you coach them as they go through a really brutal market? Because not every coach realizes that this market, to be in a career transition of some kind right now, is fundamentally different than other markets have been. So I'm going to get into that first. I'm going to describe what it is that your clients are actually going through just to make sure we're all on the same page. Your clients, if they are going through a recent layoff, these are people who probably have done everything they were supposed to do. They built the skills, they put in the time, they were good at their job, and suddenly they're outside of the job market. They get laid off or restructuring. Let me tell you, they are applying, they are networking, they are updating their resumes, they are tailoring their cover letters, they are trying to say things on LinkedIn that might attract a recruiter's attention, that makes them sound, true and compelling and why they'd be great for a job. They're getting automated rejections. They're getting all nervous and flustered and putting time into preparing for interviews and then getting ghosted for the interview. And as a result of this, having put all this time and effort into being a capable, competent professional who did everything right, they are going to be adopting a story. And I need to tell you this because I don't want any coaches to not be aware of how brutal the market is, not be aware that within an hour a role is posted on LinkedIn, suddenly there could be 1,000 applicants, not be aware that companies are doing all kinds of smarmy things, like posting roles that they have no intention of filling just to make themselves look like they're growing rapidly for potential investors. I mean, how smarmy is that? Ooh, karma to those companies. That is what your client who is experiencing layoff is going through right now. It really, really is. And no, they cannot just show up in person with their resume in hand. Nobody accepts resumes that way anymore. In fact, some businesses would say that they will not do that. They will not take a resume straight from someone's hand because they would worry about a legal issue. They would worry about the possibility that maybe someone would sue them and say the reason you didn't hire me is because I'm a woman or something of that nature. The idea is that the resume is supposed to not give identifying details about the person applying beyond their actual competencies and qualifications. And as a result of this brutal job market, your clients who are going through this right now are probably adopting a very difficult story. A story where they think, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. Maybe the years I put in don't matter to anybody. Maybe I'm too old or too expensive or too specialized or too general or too something, right? And that story is going to run underneath every application they submit. It's going to be there when they are networking. And it's going to be something that makes it really, really challenging for them to continue to have faith and show up. The rejection starts to feel so much bigger than just, oh, it wasn't a fit. So when they come to coaching with you, they are hoping that coaching in some way will help. Maybe there's a framework or a strategy, a better way to position themselves. And you as their coach might be going, whoa, I'm now navigating something genuinely complex. Some of what my client might need is practical, right? Like strategy and positioning, but some of what they need has nothing to do with the job search at all. It has to do with who they are when they're not defined by the role they used to have, or the grief of losing something that was fundamentally important to paying their bills. It has to do with the fear and of what if I can't pay my bills. They're dealing with rebuilding a sense of identity and agency in a situation where neither of those things feel stable. So you as a coach, if you're going to support a client who's going through a layoff and is in this brutal, brutal market, you need to know which of those needs is in the room at any given moment. And you need to stay in your coaching lane while you address them. So that's what we're going to get into today. So we're going to start with this. And this is career strategy problems versus identity crises that happen to be dressed up in career clothing. This is the foundational diagnostic question for a client who is in the midst of a career transition. So let's start with a career strategy problem. That looks like this. The client has a clear sense of who they are, what they want, what they have to offer, and the gap is just how do I translate that effectively into the job market? This might be a way that you can support the client that's relatively forward-looking. Like, how do I get help with positioning? How do I network? How do I evaluate an opportunity? So they're probably frustrated, but they're fundamentally oriented towards solving the problem, and they might be pretty clear with you about how you can help them. You might not be a career coach who specializes in any of those areas, but certainly you can help with the mindset game around, yeah, I get it. You just experienced a rejection yesterday. How do we look at the story underneath that and then get into the mindset that you need to get out there again, even though you just were rejected yesterday? That's really hard. So they're going to be experiencing things that are challenging, but it's probably going to be easier with a career strategy problem to help them, well, strategize. An identity crisis that's wearing career clothes looks quite different. This is the person who they're dealing with the job market, maybe a layoff, and now it's like, okay, I don't even know what to do. I don't even know what I want. Like, the loss of their previous role has actually disrupted their sense of who they are. You might be asking questions like, what do you want your next role to look like? And there's this long pause, and that all has less to do with the job market and more to do with the fact that they just don't know what they want anymore. When you ask them, well, what kinds of skills are you wanting to bring to your next role? They're going blank, not because they can't list their skills, but because there's a story about those skills that has been shaken. So the job search it looks like it's about employment, but underneath it's about selfhood. So your job in those early sessions with a career or a client who's in a career transition is to figure out, what room am I in right now? Are we in the strategy room or the identity room? And sometimes it might be both simultaneously. And this sense of an identity that's been shifted, I can't understate this enough, because if you haven't gone through this, you won't know what it feels like. And there's research on this, and it's unambiguous. There's research that shows that the effects of economic instability on personal identity, or what organizational psychologists call role-based identity, really can destabilize a person's sense of self. So a job loss is not merely a practical disruption. And especially for people with high role-based identity, which I think includes a lot of high achievers and people who were genuinely invested in their work, job loss can actually produce a grief response. I'm talking about a real grieving process with stages. And that is something that's really important for you to know as you support a client who's in that place. Now, let's be clear about scope of practice, because there's what coaching is and is not in this context. I don't want to blur the lines here, because coaching is not career counseling. Career counseling brings specific expertise in labor market trends and might do a deep dive on resume strategy or vocational assessment. And if a client genuinely needs that practical knowledge is missing of how to navigate the market, a career coach with specific expertise in that area is the appropriate referral if you don't already have that. So you can absolutely coach career transitions without being a career coach, but you should be honest with yourself and your client about what you are and what you cannot bring. What coaching brings to the transitional work when a client is in the midst of a layoff and they're transitioning careers is the capacity to help the client access their own clarity, their own agency, their own resourcefulness in a situation that is exhausting and frankly depleting all three of those areas. The coaching questions you're going to ask are not, have you tried LinkedIn Premium? They're going to be, what do you notice about how you're talking about yourself in these conversations? Or what does this situation tell you about what actually matters in your work? Or what do you notice about market silence and the story that you create about your value? Coaching in these moments also brings the capacity to simply hold space for the emotional and identity dimensions of this without pathologizing them, without trying to fix them too fast. I mean, think about this. If you're really grieving the loss of an actual person, you want to be with people who aren't going to pathologize your grief and make you wrong for feeling grief. And you aren't going to want to be around people who try to fix it too fast and bypass the grief. Now, of course, with grief work, this is not therapy. We're not doing trauma processing. If somebody is experiencing grief in such a way that you're worried it's clinical depression, they need a referral. But grief as a normative sadness in response to very genuinely difficult situations is really real. So we are acknowledging that the experience the client is having is real and has real weight. We're not bypassing it. We're not rushing past it to get to action steps. And the practical boundary question to hold in any career transition session is this: am I working with what this person is capable of doing or thinking or feeling, all of which is coaching territory, or am I working with like technical job market knowledge that they need me to provide, which is more specific career coaching expertise or career counseling or vocational training? So stay in your lane and refer out as necessary. But let's get back to the grief, because you want to hold that grief without rescuing. And career transition, like I said, it's involving grief for a lot of people. Some people are relieved. They hated their jobs and they're like, hell yeah, I don't miss the job at all. I don't like the uncertainty of what I'm going to do next, but I did not like that company, or I didn't like working for that manager, So when someone loses a role and they feel grief about it, it's usually because it was central to their identity. It was core to their relationships, their sense of contribution and competence, and they grieve it. I've had that thought often when I read the news headlines and I see about all these people who have long been government servants and their departments are just being cut in the name of BS, in my personal opinion. And if you don't like me for naming that a certain presidential administration is the cause of that, then I don't know, I guess maybe don't listen to this podcast, and I'm okay with that. Because it has done real damage for people who are devoted scientists who are trying to prevent a new pandemic to be eliminated. People who were delivering life-saving drugs to other countries to prevent the spread of AIDS, to help with malnourishment, to have their life's work taken away. I think about these things. And people, regardless of what their role is, even if it wasn't perfect, even if they kind of wanted to leave, they might grieve a loss of structure or belonging, the people they connected with, a daily purpose. It might be really hard for them to not have a clear answer to the question, what do you do? And that's a real hard place to walk through that needs to be acknowledged before you jump into strategy. So there's a rescue trap, a strategy trap in transitioning or helping with career transitions in coaching that can look like moving to action too fast. So the client comes in distressed about the job search, and if you're the coach and you're not thinking about these things, or you're uncomfortable with the distress, but you want to help, you might orient towards forward movement too quickly with options and reframes and strategies. And if your client performs engagement with that, but underneath they're still in the grief, the session will sail over the thing that needed to be sat with for a moment. And so what do you need to do in those moments? You got to stay with what's real before you start moving to strategy. This is a fundamental aspect of what we teach in CLCC. We actually call it coaching the person versus coaching the problem. And in career transition work, this might sound like, it sounds like losing this role has been about more than the job itself. Can you tell me more about what's been lost along with the role? That question opens the person, the being, the identity piece. And it actually gives the client permission to name the grief rather than just packaging it up as like a LinkedIn job search problem. You as a coach might want to be prepared, by the way, that you will spend entire sessions or stretches of sessions on identity and meaning. And it might not always result in a single action item. And if you are really, like, instead of coaching the person, you are really oriented towards coaching the problem, you might start to think, oh, these sessions are unproductive. We aren't making tangible forward progress. But it's not unproductive. This is the work that actually makes later action possible. Your clients need space to grieve what they've lost. They don't need to be rushed past it. They need space to be honest about what they want. They need space to get grounded in their sense of value. And later, they're going to make better decisions and take better actions about what to pursue if you support them in their way of being. So let's get into some specific coaching questions for these clients in this hard market, because I want to give you some concrete tools. I think there are some questions you can ask that actually really help. So let's give a couple scenarios. First, when a client is in that identity disruption phase, the questions that help are ones that separate the role from the person. Questions like, who were you before this role? What did you value? What did you care about? What made you good at the things you were good at that had nothing to do with the title? And that's not a bypass of grief. It's an invitation to remember the self that came before the role, that's going to outlast the role. In fact, the self that's here now. Because regardless of what job they have, there's a person here that cares about things, that values things. Or let's consider a situation if you're coaching a client who is catastrophizing about the job market. Let's start separating facts from a story. What do you actually know about your situation right now? Just the facts. And then, what's the story your mind is adding? A client who has had 50 applications go unanswered, that's a fact. I've had 50 applications that have not been answered. But the story, the interpretation might be, I'm not employable. That's a story. It's a painful story. It's understandable as a story. And separating facts from stories, it doesn't minimize the difficulty, but it can restore some cognitive traction. Maybe you've got a client who just feels so demoralized by the job search process, and they feel like they don't even know what they want anymore. A question that I think is helpful is, what would you do if the market were easy right now? Because it can be very generative. And this is a common question. What would you do if it were easy? Common coaching question. What would you do if the market were easy? Can remove the constraint of this hard market temporarily and just start asking what becomes visible. And this isn't magical thinking. It's just your way of accessing the client's actual preferences and values beneath the fear-based survival mode thinking that is just really common when somebody's been in a job search for a prolonged period of time. Maybe you've got a client who is just really struggling with confidence. Like they feel like they get so nervous in interviews, the pressure's on probably. Talking about things in networking conversations. The coaching question here could be, what would you say about what you have to offer if you were just like, this is the most value anybody's ever going to get? What would you say about your work, your history with this work, if you knew that they were just hanging on every word? And then after they tell you, you could say something like, what gets in the way of saying that? That second question almost always opens up something that's just really central and important to the identity piece. And the identity piece, remember, that's the story they're carrying about their own worth in this really challenging market that has not been rewarding them or confirming their worth. So what gets in the way of saying that? That's the place where you can really help the client who's struggling with confidence. And maybe you've got a client who is just exhausted and they need to hear something true from you. Well, in those cases, the most useful thing you can offer is not cheerleading. I mean, I'm not a fan of rah-rah cheerleading anyway in coaching, but nonetheless, especially then, hey, I need you to hear this. I've worked with you for a while. I need you to hear that the market's response to you right now is not an accurate measure of your value. That's two different things, and I think it's really important for your mental health to keep them separate. So those are a couple of different scenarios that can be helpful, whether your client's feeling like their whole identity is disrupted, or they don't even know what they want anymore, or they're just exhausted. Career transition coaching in a hard market is asking a lot of the coaches who support clients who are in that space. I mean, it's asking you to hold strategy and grief simultaneously. It's asking you to stay in your lane, but not be rigid about it. It's asking you to resist the impulse to rescue, even though you empathize so deeply with your clients. They're hurting. It's frustrating. And you want to keep returning the client to their own agency, their own power, their own capacity, even in a situation that feels like all of that has been taken away. So I really believe it's some of the most important coaching there is right now, because the clients navigating this, they're not just looking for a job. I think they're really looking for a way back to themselves in an environment that feels like it's taken something essential away from them. So if you are a coach willing to hold that space, who can sit with that grief without rushing past it, who can ask questions that help the clients return to themselves, that is genuinely invaluable. And you are doing some really important work. All right, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, would you help us out and take a moment to give us a rating in iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening? It really helps us get the word out to other listeners. And before you go today, would you like free resources to support your coaching journey? Whether you're considering becoming a coach or you want advanced coach skills training, access our coaching resource library at teamclcc.com. Again, that's teamclcc.com. Can't wait to connect with you. And again, thanks for listening.